There is a sound that had not been heard in the wetlands of northeast Argentina for almost 70 years. Not a rare sound, not a subtle one. The full chest-rattling roar of a jaguar, the kind that travels through swamp water at night and makes a horse stop chewing 2 kilometers away. In January 2021, a biologist named Sebastian stood on a wooden platform in the middle of the Iberá marshes and listened to that roar come back. He had spent 12 years preparing for that single minute. He cried like an idiot, his words. Not mine. The jaguar was a female. They named her Mariwa. She walked out through an opened gate with 2 cubs trailing behind her, and within 30 seconds, she had vanished into grass taller than a grown man. And here is the part almost nobody outside Argentina understood at the time. The land she walked into was supposed to be already finished. Iberá, say it slowly. In the Guarani language, it means shining water, which is generous, because for most of the 20th century, the only thing shining there was the metal teeth of farm machinery. Iberá is the second largest wetland on the planet, bigger than Slovenia, bigger than half the countries you can name. And for decades, it sat there in the middle of the Corrientes province, like a patient nobody had checked on. The jaguars were gone, the giant anteaters were gone, the pampas deer, the green-winged macaws, the collared peccaries, gone, gone. Hunted, drained, fenced, replaced with pine plantations and skinny cattle and rice paddies that bled chemicals into the marsh. By the 1980s, locals said the swamps had stopped making noise at night. That is the line they used. The swamp stopped making noise. Now think about how strange that sentence is. A wetland is supposed to be the loudest place on Earth after dark. Frogs, owls, caimans grumbling at each other in the reeds, capybaras chewing, the snap of fish, the constant electric drone of insects. When a wetland goes silent, it is not resting. It is the same kind of silence you get in a hospital room when the machine has been switched off, and nobody has come in yet to say it out loud. That is the place 14 jaguars were sent into. And what they did there in the next 4 years has rearranged everything. Ecologists thought they understood about how landscapes heal. Let me back up. Because to understand the insanity of dropping apex predators into a wetland that hadn't seen one since the Eisenhower administration, you need to understand the man who started this whole thing, and you need to understand why most serious scientists called him reckless for the first decade he was talking about it. His name was Douglas Tompkins, American, founder of the North Face and Esprit clothing. A man who, at the age of 46, sold off his fashion empire, looked his lawyers in the eye, and said he was moving to Patagonia to buy as much wild land as he could afford and then give it back. Not to investors, to the planet. He and his wife, Christine, spent the next 30 years buying up over 2 million acres across Chile and Argentina, and the piece they cared about most, the piece that obsessed Doug toward the end of his life, was Iberá. Because Iberá, in his view, was not just damaged, it was missing pieces. And a wetland missing its jaguars, he kept saying, was like a clock missing its mainspring. It still looked like a clock. It just no longer told time. Doug died in a kayaking accident on a lake in Chilean Patagonia in 2015, hypothermia, 6 hours in freezing water. He never got to see a single wild jaguar back in Iberá. Christine kept going. She partnered with the Argentine government. She fought 100 bureaucratic battles. She put together a team led by an Argentine conservationist named Sofia Heinonen. And they built something nobody had ever built on this continent. A jaguar reintroduction center, on an island in the middle of the marsh, with pens the size of football fields where rescued cubs and orphaned adults could learn to hunt capybara without ever seeing a human face. That sentence sounds simple. It was not simple. They had to source the jaguars from zoos in Brazil and Paraguay, from rescue centers that took in cubs after their mothers had been shot. Some of the adults were too damaged ever to be released and became breeding animals. Their cubs born inside those huge fenced wilderness pens, were the ones who would walk free. And every cub had to pass tests. Could it kill on its own? Did it avoid people? Did it stay away from cattle? If any cat failed any test, it stayed inside, forever. Marua was the first to pass everything, so she walked out first. And what happened in the months after she did is where the story stops being heartwarming and starts being almost difficult to believe. Within 6 months of jaguars being on the loose in Iberá, the capybaras changed. Capybaras, if you have never seen one, are basically guinea pigs the size of a Labrador retriever, and Iberá had become absolutely overrun with them. With no predators for 2 generations, they had stopped behaving like prey. They lounged on the banks in the middle of the day. They grazed the marsh edges down to bare mud. They congregated in herds of 200 animals that ate everything in front of them and turned shoreline vegetation into a kind of golf course. That landscape, that big, flat, eaten-down, exposed shoreline, was suffocating the wetland. Because when capybaras eat every reed and every sedge at the water's edge, the water heats up. Fish nurseries collapse. The little caimans have nowhere to hide. Wading birds lose their cover. The whole shallow ecosystem starts running too hot and too bare. Bring in 14 jaguars and what happens? The capybaras do not just get eaten, they get scared. They start moving. They abandon the easy open banks and retreat into thicker cover. They graze in smaller groups for shorter periods. They keep their heads up. They eat and leave. That single behavioral shift, call it the fear effect, is something ecologists have been arguing about for decades, ever since the wolves came back to Yellowstone. Some scientists insist the wolf and willow story has been oversold. But what happened in Iberá was so fast and so visible that even the skeptics took notes. Within 18 months, the reed beds along the lagoons started growing back, not in patches, in walls, 3 meters tall. Birds came back to nest in them. The water shaded again. Fish came back into the shallows. Caimans found nurseries again. And then something nobody had predicted began to happen with the deer. Marsh deer in Iberá had been pushed to the brink. There were a few hundred left in pockets where hunting pressure had been low. The thinking had always been, well, jaguars eat deer, so reintroducing the cat will hurt the deer. Right, logical, wrong, because what was actually killing the deer were feral dogs. Packs of them, descendants of abandoned ranch dogs, running the marsh edges and chasing pregnant does into exhaustion. The jaguars hated those dogs, killed them on sight. Within 2 years of jaguars being established, the feral dog population in the central marshes had crashed. Marsh deer numbers started climbing for the first time in living memory. Are you following this? The predator that was supposed to eat the deer was actually protecting them by killing the thing that was actually eating them. The whole chain of logic that had said, no, no, do not bring back the big cat, it will destroy what little we have left. That whole chain was built on a wrong assumption about who the villain was. And it kept happening. The giant anteaters, which had been quietly reintroduced a few years earlier in a separate program, started thriving in areas where jaguars roamed. Why? Because pumas, which had been the dominant predator before the cats came back sting, will absolutely take down a young anteater. Jaguars will kill or chase off pumas in their territory. Less pressure from pumas, more anteaters. The green-winged macaws, gone from Argentina for over a century, came back through their own reintroduction program. They needed mature palm trees with intact crowns. The crowns were intact because the capybaras had stopped chewing seedlings flat. The chain went and went and went. I want you to think about what that means. Because there is a sentence that gets thrown around in conservation circles, almost a cliche now. Apex predators sculpt ecosystems. It sounds poetic. It sounds like a TED Talk metaphor. Iberá is the place where you can stand on a boat with a GPS and actually see it. You can see the line on the satellite imagery where the reeds came back. You can hear the difference in the night sound between a lagoon a jaguar visits and a lagoon she doesn't. The metaphor became a measurement. But this is the part of the story where most documentaries would put a swelling string section and roll credits over a shot of a jaguar drinking from a stream. And if I did that, I would be lying to you. Because the most interesting thing that happened in Iberá was not what the jaguars did to the land. It was what the project did to the people. The Corrientes province had been bleeding population for 50 years. Young people leaving for Buenos Aires or Posadas, abandoned ranches, schools closing. The small towns ringing the marsh, Concepcion, Carlos Pellegrini, San Miguel, were the kind of places where the bakery closes at noon and nobody opens after. When Tompkins first started buying land there in the late 1990s, locals were furious. A rich gringoco coming in and turning their ranches into something they could not graze. Town meetings turned into shouting matches. Some accused the foundation of trying to take land for the United States. Others were sure it was a front for foreign mining. There were threats. There were lawsuits. There was at least one fire that nobody ever explained. What changed it was nothing strategic. It was tourists. Once the rewilding started showing results, once you could actually take a boat out at dawn and see a giant anteater walking across a sandbar with a baby on her back, people from Buenos Aires and Berlin and Sao Paulo started showing up. They needed places to sleep. They needed boats. They needed guides. The descendant of a gaucho who had lost his cattle ranch to a conservation buyout took a job driving a tourist skiff and made more in a month than his grandfather had made in a year. His daughter learned English. His son got certified as a wildlife guide. The bakery started opening again. New ones opened. A coffee shop. A second one. A bicycle rental place. Last year, there were almost 50,000 visitors to the Iberá region. In 1998, the entire registered tourism figure was around 400. Now, this is where I think the story turns into something a lot bigger than a wildlife video. Because what the Iberá project demonstrated is that a wild ecosystem, fully assembled, with its predators back in place, is worth measurably more to local people than the degraded ecosystem it replaced. Not in some abstract spiritual sense, in pesos, in jobs, in bakery foot traffic. In the school in Carlos Pellegrini that had to add a classroom because young families stopped leaving. A jaguar standing on a riverbank at sunrise is a more profitable land use than a skinny cow standing on the same riverbank. Once you understand that, once the local mayor understands that, the politics of conservation stop being about asking people to sacrifice for nature and start being about asking people to invest in nature, because it pays back. And here is the unsettling part. Almost nobody saw it coming. Not the ranchers, not the politicians, not even most of the scientists. The original plan, when Doug Tompkins started buying land, was the boring, defensible version of conservation. Buy the land, fence it off, keep people out, let it recover. The wild version, the version where you actively put back the missing pieces, including the dangerous pieces, the cats, the apex predators, the animals that scare cattlemen. That version was considered fringe in the early 2000s. It was the kind of idea you proposed at the end of a conference, after the wine had been opened. 20 years later, it is the model. Right now, there are rewilding projects citing Iberá as their playbook in Mozambique, in Romania, in the British Isles, in Patagonia, in Kazakhstan, in the American West. There is a serious effort to put grizzlies back into California. Wolves are recolonizing the Alps without anyone's permission. The Netherlands, of all places, has a wild horse and bison reserve in the middle of one of the most densely populated countries on the planet. The dam is breaking, and Iberá is one of the first places where the world saw the proof. You can rebuild a place, not just protect it, actually rebuild it. Take a wetland that had been declared functionally dead, that had been written off in textbooks, and within a single decade put 14 of its missing apex predators back, and watch the whole ecosystem stand up like someone hitting a defibrillator. I want to come back to Mariua, the female who walked out first. By the end of 2023, she had raised 3 different litters in the marsh. Her cubs had cubs. Her grandcubs had grandcubs. The estimated wild jaguar population in Iberá right now is somewhere between 30 and 40 animals, all descended from those original released cats, and from new ones added each year. The reintroduction center is still operating. They are still raising orphans. They are still walking them through their tests. And every once in a while, a camera trap somewhere deep in the reeds will catch a young jaguar that nobody has ever seen before, an animal born wild to a mother born wild, with no human handlers in her ancestry at all. The first true wild generation. The first cats in 70 years to live entire lives in Iberá without ever having been touched by a person. There is footage from one of those camera traps that I cannot stop thinking about. A young male, maybe 2 years old, walks past the lens at dawn. He stops. He looks directly at the camera. And then he does this thing. He lowers his head and rubs his cheek against the post the camera is mounted on, the way a house cat marks furniture. Scent marking, claiming territory. That post, that piece of land, that frame of marsh grass in the background, all of it is his. He does not know he is the first of his kind in 3 generations. He just knows it belongs to him. If you have read this far, I want to ask you something, and I am asking it because I genuinely want to know. What is the equivalent piece of dead land near where you live? Every country has one. A river that got straightened into a ditch, a forest that got turned into a parking lot, a marsh that got drained for soybeans, a hillside that got mined and left bare. We all know where ours is. We pass it every week. The question Iberá puts in front of us is uncomfortable. It is not, can we save what's left? It is, can we bring back what's gone? Drop your country and your dead place in the comments. I am collecting them, genuinely. Because the next video I am working on is about the most ambitious rewilding proposals on each continent right now, and I want to know which places matter to you. The roar Sebastian heard from that platform in January 2021. That roar travels almost 3 kilometers in a wetland. It travels further if the wind is right. He told a journalist later that he stood there for a long time after Mariua had vanished. The sun came up. The mist came off the water. And in the distance, somewhere across 2 lagoons and a stand of palms, a second jaguar he could not see answered her back. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Because for the first time in a long time, the news from the wild is not all bad. Some places are coming back. Some animals are coming home. And in a marsh in northeast Argentina, after 70 years of silence, the swamps are loud again at night.